A lovely warm welcome from all of our speakers today. I'm Jade, I'm the Head of Partnerships here at MyTutor. I oversee the partnerships team and I support over 100 schools myself that work with us directly with MyTutor. We're also joined by Richard Gerber, a previous teacher and head teacher with experience in supporting turnaround of a failing school, but now a best-selling author. So he's here today with some amazing energy and here no doubt to challenge us, to challenge our own thinking. And we're very lucky to have the wonderful Nima Abdullah, Assistant Head Teacher of City of Leicester College. She's got a wealth of experience both as an educational leader, but also quite handily in supporting MyTutor programs within her school. She joins us to share her anecdotal experiences and to answer your questions too. So now I've made the introductions, the agenda for the session, I will pass over to Richard in just a mo. Do think about any questions that you've got. Please do feel to pop them in the chat as we go, and we'll see if we can pop them to Richard at the end of his talk. I'll also be sharing some insights from our latest impact research report before opening up for our school spotlight with Nima and Q&A. So just before I pass over to Richard, we're aware that some of the delegates today might not be working with MyTutor already. So MyTutor, in a single slide nutshell, we've been supporting schools to run online tuition, whether that be before, during or after the school day since 2016. So before the NTP funding, oh, my slideshow has gone, I believe. I apologise. Sorry, folks. My apologies. So I was just explaining MyTutor in a slide nutshell. So we've started before NTP funding was introduced, but it has obviously opened up great awareness of tuition as a large-scale intervention to support closing that gap since that's widened since the pandemic started, particularly for disadvantaged students, to allow them to make more progress. We've created our tuition model to support what's going on in the classroom, and we've supported well over 1 million lessons for young learners to date. Our previous impact study showed that MyTutor students make over twice the amount of progress as their peers. So I will pass over to Richard now. I will stop sharing my slides so you get the full effect of his genius background. And do watch out for the quite significant name drop during Richard's talk. Over to you, Richard.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Jade. And thank you all for taking the time to be here this afternoon. And a second thank you from me. It's a number of years since I was working directly in schools as a head teacher and as a teacher. My wife's a head teacher, my daughter's a teacher. So I know just how challenging the last few years have been and how dramatically I think the challenges on you and our students have transformed over that period. So I can just start by saying a huge thank you and my utmost respect to all of you. So in the 15 minutes or so that I've got with you, I'm going to, as Jade suggested, I'm going to drop a couple of names actually, and just share some thoughts with you, some big thinking stuff just for you to take away, because frankly, you're coming to the end of a long day, a long week, and an unbelievably long year. The last thing you need is some pompous former head teacher online to tell you that you're not doing it right or you should be doing it differently. So hopefully the next 15 minutes can just wash over you. I want to start really as we reflect on the lived experience of the last few years. And we think in particular about what that means for us moving forward as educators and for our students. And I think the best way I can begin is to introduce you to my first of two big name drops this afternoon. And that is to this man. This is Barry Barish. Now, some people have very generously said he looks a little bit like my grandfather. Frankly, I wish. Barry Barish, for those of you that aren't scientists, well, you might not know if you are scientists, I guess. Barry Barish was the 2017 Nobel Prize winner for physics. He is a remarkable human being, and many people put him up there with Stephen Hawking as one of the most important minds in the scientific world of the 20th or 21st century. For those of you that are interested, he got his Nobel Prize for his research and work into gravitational waves, which I think, interestingly enough, has been in the news today. Anyway, I got the chance to meet Barry a couple of years ago, and I want to share with you our conversation because he raised 2 points which I think are really interesting and challenging for us as educators moving forwards. So the question I asked Barry, which is a question I ask many of the people I'm privileged enough to meet in the world's beyond frontline education, was what kind of people are you looking for? He said, well, it's interesting. He said, because when we were putting together the team, the research team that went on to win the Nobel Prize, we were very, very lucky. We had over 3,500 serious applicants. And I stopped him for a minute. I said, just what do you mean by serious applicants? And he smiled and he said, well, you know, these were people who were renowned in their field of science across the world. He said most of them, and I don't know how anyone gets one, let alone two. He said most of them have got at least 2 doctorates to their name. He said they've had their abstracts published in the world's most significant journals. These are some of the world's most highly regarded scientists. I said, just out of interest then, from the 3,500, how many places did you actually have on your team? He said, well, we were incredibly well funded out of Caltech in the US, and we had enough funding for 138 researchers. I said, well, how on earth did you get from 3,500 to 138? He said, well, you know, their qualifications were there for all to see. He said, but there were 2 characteristics that were hugely important to me. And so there were 2 things we were looking for. He said, the first is this. He said, the problem with science, and particularly scientific research, is the irony almost. The more successful you become, the more narrow your focus, the more specialized your vision. He said, so the higher up the science food chain you go, the more you just talk to people who are doing what you do in the way that you do it. He said, now, what that does is it starts to make you breathe stale air. He said, now, when you think about research, when you think about scientific research, it isn't about proving what you already know. It's about challenging what you think you know. It's about finding new pathways, new methodologies, new patterns. He said, so I needed 3-dimensional people. I needed people who not only had their science skills, but I needed people who had interesting hobbies. I wanted people who were interested in the arts, in travel, in languages, in all kinds of diverse areas. He said, because the thing is this, if you're serious about innovation, if you're serious about development, if you're serious about a culture where you can deal with the unknown, you need 3-dimensional people. And then he said something that I think is just such a powerful thought for all of us as educators. He said, because nobody made it onto our team if they didn't have the ability to ask stupid questions. And the second thing he said was also nobody made it onto my team if they didn't have the courage to challenge the beauty of the proof. The reason I find that fascinating is because so much about what he was talking about speaks to me about the kind of characteristics we need from our learners. We need our students to be able to ask stupid questions. And we all know what he means by stupid questions. I guess we could spend all day debating whether there is such a thing. But we all know when we're all in meetings or in rooms with people who are our peers, how paralyzing that fear of asking the question could be, because we might feel that we're asking something that's stupid. And so we hold back. And then that leads to that beautifully poetic idea that people on his team had to have the courage to challenge the beauty of the proof. And for me, the two things are linked. And it's why so much moving forward from the pandemic, we need to think about those human aspects of confidence, of risk-taking, when we're thinking about developing our children to lead into a world that we already know isn't just scarred by a pandemic, but is going to be filled with ever-increasing change and uncertainty and challenge. And that leads me to this thought. A number of years ago, I was very lucky to be involved with elite sport in the UK as we started to explore a very interesting question, which was, why was it that some of our most naturally gifted athletes never made it to the highest level? They tended to implode and walk away somewhere between the ages of 18 and 21. And of course, actually, the answer was quite straightforward. It was because many of those young people were used to winning. They were used to getting things done the way they knew they could do them. And as they climbed through the ability ranges in their chosen sport, they would win, they would win, they would win. Finally, they would arrive at an elite academy. And for the first time in their lives, they were surrounded by other athletes who were as good, if not better than they were. And that meant for the first time in their lives, they were being challenged and they were at real risk of failure. And rather than confront it, so many of those young athletes walk away. And so one of the other things I ask you to consider is this. Imagine that your classrooms are like casinos, and you as the teacher are the croupier. And every day your children are coming into that casino to gamble their self-esteem, their self-confidence, their resilience. And we know as those kids walk into our classrooms, some, the high rollers, and we all know who they are, they walk in with bagfuls of poker chips of self-esteem, self-confidence, resilience. And what they do when we ask them to engage with us in learning, and when we do that, we spin the wheel and we roll the ball. We say to those kids, come on, gamble some of those poker chips. And the high rollers, they're chucking poker chips everywhere. Red, black, odd, even, individual numbers. It doesn't matter, because if they get it wrong, they've got tons and tons of chips left. And then there are other students, often the ones that need our support and guidance and help the most, who walk into our classrooms with one poker chip of self-esteem. And they're often the young people we see who show behavior challenges, who hide in corners trying to just be invisible during a lesson. And often they're looking at us spin the wheel and roll the ball, and they're thinking to themselves, I would love to play that game, but I've only got the one chip. And if I put it on red and it comes up black, if I put it on even and it comes up odd, I've got nothing left. So what I'm going to do is cling on to my chip and hide in the corner. The interesting thing about both of these analogies is this. Those young people that have risen through the ranks in sporting terms have never lost. And it's only when you deal with adversity or challenge or mistake making, and you come through that scenario, that you put poker chips in your bag. And so one of the things I ask you to think about as you're tutoring and mentoring some of those students you work with is, first and foremost, ask yourself, how many poker chips are they playing with? And actually, what do we need to do first in order to raise the number of poker chips in their bag so they're prepared to play the game more and more often? Now, one of my thoughts around the results of the pandemic, and I know how challenging our students' behavior is right now, is that actually in the long term, those students who are lucky enough to have survived the pandemic relatively intact, whether they know it or not, have overcome extraordinary adversity. So we have more chips in our bags than maybe even we realize. So a couple more thoughts for you, and then I'll finish with the big name drop and then hand back to Jade. The first is this: when I was a principal and we were working on developing the vision for how we were going to create learning in a school that had been written off, we started actually with a memory that I had when I trained to be a teacher way back now at the end of the 1980s, the start of the 1990s. And I remember being taught about an American progressive educator called John Holt. I remember being fascinated by John, and particularly one story that I want to share with you. And that was this: that when he retired, his wife wanted to buy him a gift. And she'd known throughout his working life that the one regret he'd always had was that he'd never learned to play a musical instrument. And she knew the musical instrument that he really wanted to learn to play was the cello. So she organized for him to have some cello lessons, which he loved. And he started going to his cello lessons every week, and he was thoroughly enjoying it and practicing at home. And after a few weeks, his music teacher said to him, "Why don't we sit down and have a cup of coffee, John, and just talk about where you want to go next and what kind of music, etc." And so they did. And she said to him, "You know, I think you're an incredible student," and talked about the kind of music that he thought he might be interested in. And she finally said to him, "Have you got any questions you'd like to ask me?" And he said, "I do, actually, just one." He said, "For a few months now, I've been telling my friends that I'm learning to play the cello." He said, "When can I finally tell them that actually I'm playing the cello?" And again, I think it's really important in the intensity of what we do, particularly with those students that we work with. We don't make them feel that everything they're doing is some form of purgatory, right towards one day you might, if you're lucky, move into living life. And it's why, for me, when we developed our concepting at Grange, we had what we called our circle of learning. The idea being this: that the priority for us as educators was to develop in our children a love of life and to understand the connectedness of the power of learning and how that could help young people live their lives better. By doing that, we had to develop the skills and knowledge and competencies that those young people would need, which of course is what is at the heart of everything we do as teachers. But the two missing steps for me, certainly in the school that I was privileged enough to take over, were these. First of all, there wasn't enough focus on applying learning in real context. So young people saw learning as something that had an immediacy to their lives now, not just as an abstract for the future. And of course, if we focused on that, which we did, it meant that ultimately we could develop their sense of aspiration and value. You know, to put it simply, I guess, for me, the priority as educators is this: first of all, to help our children to dream, particularly those children in challenging contexts. So to give them experiences of things they would never normally have access to, opportunities they would never think about. But then the art is to turn the dream into an aspiration, because for me, a dream is a fantasy, an aspiration is tangible. And in a way, the knowledge, the skills are the rungs on the ladder which help those things to happen. But we need to remember to help our kids to dream first. And that leads me to my final name drop and my final thought before I hand back to Jade. One of my dreams came true just before COVID. I got to meet one of the number one person on my fantasy dinner party list. I don't know how many of you might have one, but I got to meet the number. Funnily enough, when I look back on it, I wonder now if I'd had to make a deal with the devil to meet the number one person on my fantasy dinner party list, would I have taken it? Would I have agreed to 2 years in basic social isolation having met this person? So, and I think I probably would have done. So the last few years are probably my fault, because just before COVID, I got to meet with him. Couple of things to say about that picture. The first is, it isn't a waxwork. That really is President Obama. The second thing to say is, I don't know if you can see from your laptop or your computer, but look at his smile. So I must have been on his fancy dinner party list too. Look how happy he is to have seen me. And finally, it's amazing how many chins a lockdown beard can hide. I'm keeping mine. But I want to finish by telling you about the question I asked him and his response. So I said to him, what is the most important thing you think you learned during your time in the White House? And he smiled that smile and I melted. He said, I'll tell you. He said, when I arrived in the White House, Richard, I was like a kid in a candy store. He said, I realized very quickly that because of my position, I could pick up the phone or email and invite the world's greatest technical experts to come and work with me, the greatest technical experts in economics, in science, in political thinking. He said, but when I look back on my 8 years in the White House, what I realize is this, that of all the problems that crossed my desk, just think about that for a moment. When you drilled into them, the truth is none of them actually were technical by nature. They were human. They were about love, anger, jealousy, greed, hatred, fear, tribalism. He said the problem too often when we're dealing with challenges and we're under pressure is we look to find the technical solution before we truly understand the humanity that lies underneath it. And it's only if we focus on the human challenge that we can build a system and a structure that meaningfully works. And so as I finish, that's where I want to leave you with that thought, that as you move forward, please, please, please don't jump steps and remember to focus on the human first. Jade, back to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Richard. I've certainly picked up a few poker chips this week myself, maybe already in delivering this presentation. But they are some great reflections for us to think on for the students, and even, I suppose, probably for ourselves too. I'll pause for a moment in case anybody wants to share any thoughts or reflections or ask any questions, maybe just in the chat. But I think we'll share your website as well on any follow-up, so anyone can reach out directly if they'd like to.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jade. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Richard. So what I will do next is I will jump into some highlights of our recent research report. It focuses on the impact of MyTutor tuition over the past academic year. So the goal today is to give you a bit more insight into how schools across the country are using online tuition. I'll share some stats that will allow you to hopefully benchmark against what you're doing in school, against others running online tuition. I'll be trying to pull out some great practice based on where our data tells us schools have had the most impact. And then I'll also be speaking to some of the ways in which you can evidence impact from your own intervention programmes. So across our partner schools this year, the average number of students taking part is just over 73, with of those, just over a third are classified as pupil premium students. Now, whilst you'll know best how many students would benefit from and indeed engage with tuition, what it does show us is that many are offering online tuition now as a wide-scale intervention and often across multiple key stages. This year, we've seen schools running mainly one-to-one programmes, although we have started to see a significant increase in 3-to-1, with just over a quarter of the programmes running as small groups. Our top tip It'll be no surprise to you that you can, of course, support more learners if you run 3-to-1 tuition, but it also means you might be able to stretch your NTP funding a little bit further to cover more of the price of the programmes, particularly into next year, as funding changes slightly. The feedback we've had around this year from how schools have been making the most of 3-to-1 tuition has included setting up sessions after school from home to make the logistics of running large 3-to-1 groups more possible. We've also heard that some have seen the best results from running 3-to-1 with some of the humanities subjects. So being able to share more subjective views across with a number of your peers, being able to learn from one another as well as the tutor has been really positive. We've also had great feedback on how it works for languages too. On average, schools have supported across 4 different subject areas, and the most popular time slot has been 5 p.m. on a Tuesday. Our impact data and our schools tell us that tuition is most impactful when it's embedded across the school rather than isolated as one key stage or subject. And many of the schools that have been working with us for a number of years have evolved how they use tuition. There's usually always a need to support their non-negotiable students, which usually looks like a group of year 11 or 13 students preparing for exams. But we've also heard that once they've embedded that, they then move on to embed tuition slightly earlier into Key Stage 3, just to support higher engagement later on down the road, getting students to really understand what tuition is about and buy into it earlier in their schooling life. Our top tip is to nominate a tuition leader within your school who isn't part of school SLT. The average attendance in schools with non-SLT programme leads is actually 6% higher. And we're not suggesting that that's a correlation to capability. It's mainly just related to time and balancing competing priorities. Also, interestingly, the more members of staff that are supporting the programme that have access to the MyTutor platform, the higher the general attendance is too. EEF research shows that for each young learner, attending 6 or more lessons can lead to a whole grades increase. At MyTutor, we assume that once a student has completed a programme, which for us is usually between 10 to 15 sessions, it will result in at least a grade's worth of additional progress. So based on that, we're pretty confident that we see at least over 81 potential grade increases on average per school. But based on the EEF evidence, we suspect that may actually be slightly higher. We consistently receive feedback from our schools that tutors of being closer age to their students helps to support them to drive up further engagement with the tutors. Our tutors have been through the school system not so long ago, and whilst the primary goal is to obviously support making progress on attainment, our tutors have been able to spark and build great rapport, and that can lead to more positive outcomes or engagement with learning, both in the sessions, but also translating into the classroom too. On average this year, for our programmes up until the end of spring term, we've seen attendance rates sitting at around 63%. We've got a really wide range of programmes that run for various different types of cohorts, from large whole school programmes offering all students access to tuition, to large sort of focused groups, maybe for those not making expected progress. Plus, we'll also see more focused sessions for those looking to stretch themselves, or even non-school attenders. So the attendance rates that schools might expect or strive for across these different programmes can be really varied. For example, particularly for disengaged students that aren't coming into school, we may see an attendance rate of 20%. And in many cases, when we look at the average attendance of that specific type of programme, 20% could be sector leading. So it's important to think about the level of engagement that you think is realistic based on the students you're supporting, or to talk to us about how to gauge whether there's any more support that we can help provide to boost engagement. A top tip, pupils that are well briefed on their MyTutor programme were able to log in before their first session, saw a 9% increase in their week 1 attendance. So it really makes a big difference for engagement, having a chance to see that lesson space before they start their sessions. We've already got quite a few partner schools who've signed up for our Champion Schools programme, and next academic year we are formally launching that programme. So Champion Schools programme is really about us trying to help in any way that we can. We've developed it based on the things that our partner schools have asked for. Our end of year survey will be launching shortly, and it's probably one of the best ways to be able to spend a bit of time to reflect on what more that you think that you need from us and how better to support your students. The benefits of Champion programmes include exclusive research and events for you and your teaching teams, but more importantly, exciting competitions and prizes to help engage and reward your learners. For those of you online who do currently work with us at MyTutor, I definitely saw some familiar names pop up there. You'll be receiving your personalised copy of the impact report in the next few days. It'll summarise the number of sessions and students that you've supported, and that might be helpful if you are going through the process of completing any funding returns right now. So do keep out an eye for that report landing. You'll receive a physical copy and potentially a copy into your inboxes too. You'll also be able to see which of the MyTutor awards you have won. So finally from me and the whole of the MyTutor team, as a little thank you for those that already work with us, we should see a tasty treat landing on your desk as well in the next couple of days. So just a big thank you and well done for another successful year. So this feels like a great opportunity to introduce Nima. As I said, Assistant Head Teacher at the City of Leicester College. Welcome, Nima. Would you mind kicking us off with a little introduction and a short overview of your school and the learners that you support?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Lovely to see you all. So I work, as Jade said, at the City of Leicester College. It's a really large, very multicultural and diverse inner city school. We are an 11 to 19 school, so we've got a sixth form attached. I think roughly we have about 1,800 students, so massive school. We've just converted into an academy, so really exciting times ahead for us. As a school, we are about 20%-ish pupil premium. We suspect that number is a little bit higher than that actually, and we're working to kind of get our parents on board to see whether they're eligible and all those kinds of things. But really interestingly, we are, I think, just slightly under 70% classed as EAL, so our students. So a very multicultural, culturally rich school. Yeah.
And can you maybe tell us about some of the challenges that you face with that cohort and the learners that you have? What are your kind of day-to-day challenges that you're working towards?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes without saying, the pandemic was massive for us here in Leicester. We were the only city nationally that, had the extra lockdown. So in that sense, we closed a lot more and for longer periods of time than other schools. And I think one of our biggest challenges is trying to get back to some form of normality from that. So where we are in Leicester, it's not particularly classed as a deprived area, but many of our students come from all over Leicester, some in one of, some of the most deprived areas in the Midlands, East Midlands in particular. So for us, that social mobility, that deprivation is massive, and we're seeing that so much more, particularly with the cost of living crisis right now, and we're seeing those kind of external barriers that our students have seeping inside into the classroom. So I think, as mentioned by Richard, behaviour is one of the things that I think nationally is a massive issue, but something that we're also trying to tackle. Literacy as well, that's always been something that has been at the forefront for us as a school, but particularly for us in Leicester, a large proportion of our students live in those multi-generational homes, which is brilliant. But what that also means is a lot of our students don't speak English at home, and they speak English as an additional language, which brings massive benefits, and it's lovely to see so many of our pupils as multilingual, but that also sometimes does mean that we have challenges inside the classroom where at school that's their only platform of, hearing that academic talk. So yeah, I think quite a few challenges that we're facing, pretty similar to, I'm guessing, nationally across all of the UK.
Can you tell us a bit about why you opted for online tuition as a route to supporting your learners?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, the pandemic, as awful as it was for many people, the one good thing that came out of it was the additional funding for us as a school to be able to offer tutoring. I think in terms of the flexibility that the online tuition offers, that was the biggest thing that I think was a benefit for us. The cohort of students that we have, it's quite difficult to get them after school. A lot of our students go to things like madrasa, go to religious groups after school, take part in those kinds of activities. So it's really difficult for us to offer revision sessions, interventions after school and have that attendance. So for us, the online tuition was a kind of platform that they could use, was really flexible, the weekends, the evenings. It just meant that we were able to put something in place that we knew was going to be well attended.
Certainly a lot of feedback we get from the schools that we work with is that a big part of the impact of our programs is engagement. And sometimes if students aren't in school and they're running from home, the engagement can be a lot lower, attendance is a lot lower. So we hear great things about being able to run it during those school hours as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know in terms of the provision of the number of teachers that you've had in any vacancies, or whether you've had a strong unchanged teaching cohort, but where you aren't able to find high quality teachers, what alternatives have worked best for you?
So tutoring, that's been one of the things that we've put into place. Actually, it's worked really well. We've had a couple of absences in terms of, especially in our core subjects, particularly science, and where it's affected our Key Stage 5 students. We've really tapped into the tutoring for that. So that's been incredibly helpful. We've tried to, exhaust all, I'm guessing, like all schools, exhaust lots of revision and intervention during the school day with heads of departments, expertise where we have it. We're lucky in the sense that our SLT at our school is pretty much made up of teachers from core subjects. So we're able to really exhaust those kind of avenues for intervention. But in all honesty, I don't think there's a substitute for that high quality teaching. And all that we do extra in terms of the tutoring, interventions, revision, all of that is supplementary, but I don't think, in my opinion, really does substitute that high quality teaching in the classroom. So all we can do is try.
Brilliant. We've actually had a couple of questions coming in as well from the group, so I'll switch to Anna's asked, actually, how did you choose the 4 subjects?
So for us as a school, we really wanted to focus on literacy. It's part of our school improvement plan. And what we were finding was that one of the biggest barriers to progress in all of our subjects across the board was the barrier to literacy. And that was all sorts of things, reading, writing, oracy. And we thought actually picking the core subjects where I think a recent GL assessment data, we were reading some research that said that actually those poor literacy levels impact science and maths so much more than subjects like English Lit. And we thought that if we focused on those core subjects, it would be easier to, one, manage, but also help the progress of our students and really enable us to really focus on those key groups and those key subjects.
Thank you. And I know that you've had experience of using both 1-to-1 and 3-to-1. How did you go about, what made you choose the cohort for 1-to-1 and 3-to-1? What was your thinking?
What we found for the 1-to-1 is that it worked best for our Key Stage 4 students. So where they were able to really give us an idea of their schedules, we found that they were able to manage their time more easily than our younger students. So the 1-to-1 worked really well in terms of us being able to go back to subject teachers, ask what it is that they really needed to focus on. I used to actually personally go to their tutor groups and have a conversation with them about key topics, the time that they wanted, all those little things that I think added that personal touch that added to greater attendance for them. The one-to-one was also something that students really fed back on. I think in previous years, we did 3-to-1 for Key Stage 4, and our Key Stage 4 students just felt that actually it wasn't as beneficial as when it was one-to-one. So that was the reasoning behind one-to-one for Key Stage 4. And Key Stage 3, quite simply, we did the 3-to-1 to be able to offer it to a wider range of students. We thought that actually in terms of confidence and our students' ability to talk and articulate themselves, we thought that it would give them a greater chance of being confident if they were with their peers. So that's why we went for 3-to-1 for Key Stage 3.
I certainly hear a lot of similar stories from other schools that I work with around starting with equality and moving towards equity as they get closer to that all important end of their kind of school, end of Key Stage 4. You talked about being able to go into the classrooms, talk to the students, prepare them and involve them in that way. How else did you go about engaging your learners? Are there any stories that you can tell us?
So one of the things that, you know, we've really come to realise is our students love prizes. I mean, we all do, and rewards. And I'm lucky enough to have an admin team to help support with engagement and attendance. So what we do is we run half-termly competitions for 100% attendance, and we offer anything from like £10 to £20 Amazon vouchers. Sometimes we get them to actually say what they want. But anything up to the value of about £20, we say we'll randomly select, you know, 3 students that have 100% attendance. The other thing that we do is we have a real strict policy in terms of swapping kids, and we're quite strict about it. We say, you know, 3 strikes and you're out, which sounds really harsh, but it just means that they're just a little bit more, I think, willing to engage when they know that actually that opportunity will go. Parental communication and dialogue has been massive for us. So we make sure that every single parent or carer knows if their child has been selected for tutoring. We tell them the times. We offer technology, and in some cases we've even provided Wi-Fi dongles to help engage our students. So that's just kind of, like you said, that idea of equity. It's those little things that we do to help break down the barriers of even accessing the tutoring. But in terms of actually really hoping and getting that attendance up, I think for us it has been those rewards and those prizes, those competitions, that incentive to attend.
Certainly. There's another question actually in the chat which connects to the parent point there, so I'll just call that out. Can schools recommend the service to parents to pay individuals in addition to the school package? So in answer to that, there are a couple of ways in which we can help. We do offer a direct parent service, so that is something that schools can make their parents aware of. What we are keen to do is to make sure that the schools are maybe thinking about the students that will engage really well, and whether the funding, how they're assigning the funding ultimately to support the students that may benefit from it, maybe disadvantaged students, and then supporting really well engaged students if they can through promoting the service to parents as well. So we can follow up with a little bit more information on that too, if helpful. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about kind of just what concerns you for next year? It doesn't have to be just tuition, but just generally your outlook for next year, what's weighing on your mind?
Yeah, I think for me, the recruitment crisis, I mean, particularly with the humanities, we found it quite difficult to find subject specialists. If there are any geography teachers out there listening and you fancy a job, do hit me up. But I think, yeah, with the state of education and with everything going on in society, I think for me, the recruitment crisis is massive. And it's something that I think it's not just us facing it. When you talk to heads and assistant heads from all sorts of schools, teachers generally, there's a massive recruitment crisis and lots of teachers leaving the profession, particularly those that have a wealth of experience. That really concerns me and worries me, because, you know, sometimes we have days where you walk down the corridor and there's a lot of supply. There's lots of cover teachers coming in, and they're doing an absolutely brilliant job in supporting us. but they're not specialists. And we've got, you know, for me, in my opinion, for our school, sometimes, you know, we have days where there's just far too many teachers that are having to teach subjects that they don't specialize in. So that's one of my biggest concerns. My second concern, more closely to do with tutoring, is the funding. So I know that the NTP funding will stop next year, and that worries me slightly in terms of what provisions we can put in place, what's sustainable for us as a school long term, because we want to start looking at something that, you know, where we have a provision that's kind of rolled out year after year. And it worries me in terms of how much we can basically afford to provide, because the last couple of years have been brilliant in going back to that phrase, that equity over equality, and providing those little stopgaps, those little things to bridge that gap. And I think, you know, last year's results, the gap was the widest it's ever been between our PP and non-PP students. So yeah, that worries me in terms of those extra provisions we can put in place. So yeah.
I think there's a lot of us that are actively keeping our fingers crossed, maybe even our toes. But potentially, you know, if we continue to make the powers that be aware of how important we think tuition is to support closing that gap, fingers crossed, the funding will continue post next year, so for 2024-25.
Yeah.
Let's hope so. What are you looking forward to most about next year?
So next year we have our focus on oracy. So literacy is a massive focus for us across the school. And as an English teacher and someone that talks a lot, that's something that I'm really, really excited to see pan out. I think particularly for our students, our cohort, developing their oracy and just equipping them with the tools to articulate themselves and be confident, critical thinkers. I think it's going to be really beneficial. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to.
I've one more question for you. What would you do if you had a magic wand or a money tree? What would you do? What support would you put in place next year?
Oh, this is a loaded question, isn't it? Lots of things. I think for me, the one thing that I would do if I had a magic wand would be to fund schools and education properly, so that we could do what we need. We have the resources to do what we need to do in the classroom. As an English teacher, what I do is invest in our local libraries. I think they are absolute gems in our communities, and I think we're at the risk of having them die out because of, you know, lack of funding. And for me, within our school context, you know, kind of widening that provision of tutoring, because I think it's been absolutely phenomenal. And it's quite sad that that provision is kind of shrinking a little bit with the kind of funding that we have. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that I would put into place.
Amen. We've got one more question in the chat, maybe easier for me to pick up on, just running through costs and expectations of the programmes. We publish at the start of each year, we publish a tuition roadmap, which can be really great to help showcase kind of, I suppose, how a lot of schools use our programmes, from our core programmes, which run long and low across the whole term, one session of tuition a week, whether that's 3-to-1 or 1-to-1. So those programmes are what we call core, but we do always recommend potentially up to 12 sessions within any programme. We run slightly more shorter condensed, what we call boosts, which are the same number of sessions, 12 sessions in a 6-week period. They can be great for particular cohorts gearing up to particular dates, whether that's mocks or before exams. So they're still delivering the same number of sessions, just in a slightly more condensed period. And then we've got our super boosts, which are much more intensive, often used in the holidays, so Easter, summer holiday programmes, where we deliver those 12 sessions. There's a theme there. We deliver those 12 sessions either as one session a day for 2 weeks or 2 sessions a day over 1 week. So all of our programmes offer slightly different flexibility, but they're all based on 12 sessions. So our for 30 students running a programme on a 1-to-1 programme, it's £25 a session at the moment, at this point in time. And for our 3-to-1, it's £51, which equates to about £17 per learner. ultimately, the team are on hand if you want to get a more personalised, bespoke idea of what can be possible and what will suit your students best, then reach out, let us know. There aren't any other questions. I'll pause just for a moment in case if anyone wants to ask Nima anything about her experiences of running programmes, or just share any insights that you've got yourselves from listening to Nima's talk. If we do pick up any more questions, then we can certainly provide them in response to individuals that have made the requests. So that is time to draw us to a close. All good things can't go on forever. But as I mentioned at the start, you'll be receiving a copy of the recording shortly into your inboxes. Final thing to mention from us here at MyTutor, there are some changes to funding next year. We kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. This QR code, if you've got your phone handy, will link you to our school tutoring calculator. So it's a helpful tool, we hope. It takes a couple of minutes to complete, but just to understand more about how you can maximise funding next year. Equally, if you'd prefer to have a chat, then just get in touch, let us know. So finally, a huge thank you to all of you that joined and that you've been signed up for the event. An even bigger thank you for all of your wonderful insights, Nima, and to Richard as well. For now, I wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.